Morning, everybody, and welcome to our lunch and learn, or maybe brunch and learn, since it's 11 a.m. My name is Scott Price. I'm the Executive Director of the South Carolina School Board Association. Joining me this morning is Debbie Elmore, our Director of Governmental Relations and Communications, for our lobbyist, as she's affectionately known.
For now, anyways.
We are going to talk to you all today about two bills that have been filed over in the House and the Senate, and one must be comatose in order to not have heard or read something about bills related to education reform in South Carolina this year. We're going to be talking about House Bill 3759, primarily filed by Speaker Lucas over in the House, and Senate Bill 419, primarily authored by Senator Greg Hembry, who's the Senate Education Committee Chairman. These are very comprehensive bills, and they are sister bills or companion bills. So they're both the same in the House and the Senate right now. They're 84 pages. Each bill is 84 pages. And what we're going to focus on today with you all is how these bills are going to impact on school boards, or how we feel that they will impact on school boards. This is a learning opportunity, hopefully for our membership, but it's also a learning opportunity for us, because you will have an opportunity, if you look on your screen, to submit questions and provide input as we go over specific provisions of the bills. And we welcome that. Any input that you have today, any input that you have after you've read through these bills, and please, please, please take the time to read through these bills. The focus today, as I said, is going to be on the school board and governance portions of the bill, and that's under sections 47, 49, and 50 through 53 of the bill. Again, sections 47, 49, and 50 through 53 primarily focus on local board governance and provisions related to governance. Again, we want your input today, tomorrow, the next day. Questions or concerns that you have relating to these bills now and in the future. This is a learning opportunity for all of us. And I'll just say this, again, what I talked about earlier, that these bills have been covered extensively by the press. Interestingly enough, there have been no discussions or mentions made of the provisions in the bill as they impact on local school boards. And this is why we're doing this morning, is to let you know that there are significant provisions in this bill that impact on school boards and raise concerns for us in how they impact on school boards. So I want to be very clear about that. There's a ton of stuff in this bill that we may not cover all of it today. We budgeted an hour and a half. We'll hopefully be done in an hour, but we have provided an hour and a half. But I truly encourage you to read through those sections of the bill that provide that focus on school boards, and follow up with us or provide input as we're going along this morning. There have been, both bills are in their respective committees and subcommittees, and the House Education K-12 subcommittee has already had, I think, 2 hearings on the bill. We were at one and testified on one. The Senate Education K-12 subcommittee has had a preliminary, I guess, organizational meeting. It's their intention to have meetings around the state to talk about this bill and to get input. This week, the House K-12 subcommittee is holding a hearing Tuesday evening in the Block building, beginning at 4:45. The purpose for that is to allow teachers and educators who to date have not had any input in this bill the opportunity to have input and speak to the subcommittee members about concerns or issues that they have with the bill. The Senate Education K-12 on Wednesday morning, what they're doing is a section by section hearing on the bill, and Wednesday morning are the sections relating to school board governance. That'll be over in the Gressett building at 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning, and we certainly will be there for that. The timetable for these bills, I fully anticipate that with the leadership that you see behind these bills, I fully anticipate that certainly something will likely pass the House. And Senator Hembry in the Senate has basically said that he wants to take his time on this bill. So it probably will be a slower process or slowed down process over in the Senate. And it's with the idea of that will allow for more opportunities for input. Again, thank you all for taking the time to join us this morning. We may not answer all questions, but if you have questions, let us know, and we can certainly follow up on them, because again, this is as much a learning experience for us as it is hopefully for you all. And at this time, I'm going to turn things over to Debbie Elmore to sort of walk us through some of the provisions of the bill.
Thank you, Scott. I do want to reiterate that we really do want to use this webinar as a conversation. We want to hear from you. I'm going to quickly go over. We're trying to post this PowerPoint on our website, on the homepage, on that Lunch and Learn. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. We were working on this thing right up to about the start of this webinar, but we have asked our webmaster to post that on our homepage. So I just wanted to mention that so that if you do see it and download it, there's a lot of slides. I am not going to cover every single, it is on there. Okay, I'm being told it is on there. I'm not going to read every slide, every word on every slide. I'm only going to point out the major points on each slide as we go through them. I also want to, again, reiterate that I want this to be a conversation. So if you look to I guess it'll be to the right of your screen, there should be a button there that you can click on to type in any question, give any input, and I really do need your input, especially for those of you who have read this bill, because quite honestly, every time I read it, I find something new, and so the more eyes on it, the better. So please do give your input. So let's start with the first, school board accountability. There's several sections related to board accountability, beginning with the Code of Ethics, and basically it just mandates or directs the State Board of Education to adopt a model. That model will then be adopted by local boards, and anytime you make any revisions to that policy, you have to submit it to the State Department of Education. It specifies that school board members must comply with the State Ethics Act, which that's already in place. So it's just reiterating something that's already in the law. Something that's new here is that the board members are going to have to sign a statement asserting understanding of the ethics and nepotism policy, which will come up in just a few minutes, and that they have to annually disclose compliance with training requirements. There's new mandated training requirements, ethics, the nepotism policy, and conflict of interest provisions. Again, we'll go over those. But that statement now has to be signed annually and has to be submitted to the State Department of Education. All right. So, again, boards already have the policies in place. And the provision there that says that the policy must include violations of ethics or something appropriate consequences for violations. That's not defined, and so we're not sure what that means. So that's one of a question that we've posted here. And to keep in mind, and what we're going to testify is that currently boards can have mechanisms by which they can cite violations of ethics, and that's in the way of a public censure or reprimand. in a public setting. So that option is certainly available now. And if anyone has any thoughts on this section, please, again, I encourage you to just type that in.
One of the questions that I have about this is that I'm not sure I understand how they're setting these new ethics provisions up as they relate solely to school boards as opposed to any other public official. Certainly I have concerns and questions about that. It doesn't seem fair as in one sense. The other is I don't understand how it's going to work because it has the State Board of Education basically developing these ethics provisions that are going to be now policed by the Ethics Commission. I'm not sure how that's going to work. You've got one body developing the actual ethics provisions, and then you have another body that is basically practicing oversight and exercising oversight over that provision that's created by another body. That to me seems problematic in and of itself.
Those are good points. All right, let's move on to nepotism. This is new. This is a new section, new provision, a new requirement for boards must adopt nepotism policies, which most boards, most districts do have nepotism policies.
I would say all districts.
All of them do. Okay.
Policies.
Now, what is different about this is they extended even further by saying that a person cannot serve on a school board or as a school or district administrator if she has a family member who is hired as a school or district administrator after December 31st, 2020. This provision can be waived if in districts, but you have to apply for that waiver to the State Board of Education. And that is only for those districts that have fewer than 3,000 students. And that the hearing to determine that waiver must be conducted as well.
We did have a question
Yes.
from one of our listeners, and that is whether there are current or similar rules or regulations put on other locally elected officials, city or county council. No, and that's, again, everybody who is a public official, public body currently falls under the State Ethics Act, period. That includes school board members. The question that I would have would be who out there thinks that they're not governed by, as a school board member, who out there thinks that you're not already governed by the Ethics Act? I mean, you're certainly filing statements of economic interest, every day or whenever you're doing it. And so it sets up a separate set of ethics laws that apply solely to school board members and to school boards.
The other thing about the nepotism provisions is that it sets up a situation where if an individual wishing to run for the board of a district employing a family member, he or she must seek a waiver and participate in a public hearing as well. So it's a concern there being that we're afraid that this may cause folks not to want to get on the school board because of all the hoops that they have to follow.
That, I would go one step further and say that the way this is set up, it might prevent somebody from running for their local school board without having to go through that convoluted waiver process. It could potentially prevent somebody, especially in the small rural communities. Somebody may not be able to run for the board because of these provisions, and that to me raises constitutional issues, equal protection issues, other areas where civil rights may be impacted. So we certainly are concerned about the provisions here in terms of how it could impact somebody's ability to run for a local board.
The other thing that it does is it seems to set a different standard again for school boards than other elected bodies. Certainly, if this is a good provision, then it should apply to all public officials, to all public elected and appointed bodies. This one is especially problematic because this is one of the causes for removing a school board member as well. The governor can remove a school board member for violation of the nepotism policies and statutes. So,
which I don't think is applicable to any other elected official.
correct.
Governor, certainly the governor can remove an elected official for certain violations. That's clearly stated in not only in the Constitution but in statute. But this sets up nepotism for removal from office.
Yeah, and if you are talking to lawmakers about this, please remind them that school board members are already prohibited under the state's ethics law from participating in the hiring. You must recuse yourself in the hiring or cannot participate in the discipline matters of any family member who may be employed there. So there is, I guess there is I don't know if you call it checks or balance there issue, but there is something already in provision. So I don't know that, and I don't know that all lawmakers know this. I don't, so we're going to certainly make it known. And if you can help us out with that as well, that would be great. All right, so there's a whole section now going to talk about these conflict of interests. And I'm just going to warn you on these slides, they're really it's a summary of that. You really do need to read them in depth. There's 10 conditions that school board members are prohibited from doing and carrying out their official duties as members. And I'm not going to read through all of these. Most of these, are pretty common. I mean, you can't act on a matter involving a business that you or your family has an economic interest in that would benefit you personally. You can't, use your official position for
all of which is currently in the Ethics Act.
Right.
As it applies to all elected officials, including school boards. That's
right. So there is, so you want to read through all of these. Again, these are summarized conditions, but if you could read the bill to see, you may catch some things that we aren't catching, but they seem to be pretty, pretty consistent with the ethics. Some of them may be a little different or be a little more.
There's two provisions in here that I thought were interesting. One would be that you cannot. It actually does say that you cannot disclose information that's discussed under executive session unless that privilege has been waived by the 2/3 vote of the board, which I think is pretty interesting, and probably something that needs to be applicable to all. Again, if it's something that's good and would help help strengthen local governance and the deliberations of public bodies, then it should be applicable to all public entities. The other piece that's in there that I thought was interesting, Debbie, is just a section where it talks about not keeping somebody from discussing board information, policy development outside of the school board meeting. Or is that in another section?
No, that's in another section.
Okay.
I think that's in another section.
We'll come back to that then.
The other thing that's new here is, and it is kind of curious as to why it specifies that a board with 2/3 vote of members present may request the State Ethics Commission conduct a hearing concerning the violation by a board member of conflict of interest. Now, under the State Ethics Act, any individual can make a request to the State Ethics Commission to conduct an investigation concerning a violation, and that is done anonymously. It can be done anonymously. That's right. So this is different here, and also the other thing that is stated. I mean, of course, we talk about this in all of our training, but it's specifically stated that board members are not to unduly interfere with duties related to the daily operations of the district of superintendents and administrators. Of course, we've talked about that, but it's specifically specified in this act.
Well, and that kind of stems from, I guess, micromanagement and discussions or claims of there being excessive micromanagement from school boards relating to superintendents and administrators. Each of you has a policy, a board policy that you all have debated and adopted at the local level that establishes clear roles and responsibilities for school boards and for superintendents. The question that I have about this particular provision would be what does unduly interfere mean? I mean, that almost seems to be an overly subjective standard where whether I'm being, as a superintendent, being unduly interfered with is going to be in the eye of the person who's being interfered with. And that's just something I'll mention. We probably not going to have opportunity to do that, but there are a number of things in this bill that are not defined.
Yes.
And that's always an area for concern. Unduly interfere, just being one example. And Debbie talked about, I guess the interesting thing to me is we had a discussion with House leadership last year about a separate bill that was covering school board ethics. And we talked about it. We did, I thought, come to some level of agreement that basically everything that they were outlining wanting to do is already in the law. The problem is there's the trigger mechanisms that are currently in the law. Nobody wants to pull the trigger on a fellow board member. Nobody wants to pull the trigger on a fellow county council member or a city council member. But as Debbie said, anybody can file a complaint, an ethics complaint against a public official. We've seen that in South Carolina, where citizens filed ethics complaints. And yes, they can be done anonymously. What I don't understand about this bill is by saying a 2/3 vote of the members present may request a state ethics commission hearing concerning a violation by a board member. That almost makes it, to me, less likely that a complaint would be filed regarding a perceived violation. So that doesn't make sense to me.
No, and I think because you go straight to a hearing and not have any kind of an investigation first, that makes it very problematic because you could be calling for a hearing, I mean, not saying that he would do this, but maybe, out of revenge or something to publicly embarrass someone. So that is very problematic. I mean, it should be investigated before you have any kind of a hearing.
And again, that goes to the lack of clarity for some of the provisions that we see in this bill.
All right. Okay.
And remember, while we're moving forward, remember again, we're focusing on specific issues related to school board governance. I guess I should have said at the start, and I apologize, the fact that we're even having a discussion overall on education reform, I think is probably a good place to be in. These bills that are out there, both the speaker and the education committee chairman in the Senate have said they're not perfect, and there's plenty of room for changes and input and all of that. Some of the provisions in there when it talks about teacher raises and areas that focus on retention and recruitment of teachers, some of that's pretty good. So I don't want to sit here and make everybody think that we're throwing water on overall the bills in general. But as I said, what we're focusing on is how they impact on you as school board members. And in that respect, we have a lot of concern.
And the last thing I want to say about the conflict of interest, just to drive this point, is the bill does not say, oh, these are things you shouldn't do. This specifically states you're prohibited from doing. So if you do these things, keep in mind then that you are subject to be removed based on the ethics. So we're concerned by that because it sets up a separate ethics system for school boards. Why? Why is that? And we're not sure how some of the provisions work in conjunction with current procurement laws when it comes to those larger projects in terms of being low bid and how that is handled and those kinds of things. All right. The next section deals with board compensation, and this is very interesting. It just says that, a board may create modified salary, travel stipend, or any other compensation that may be in the board's purview, but whatever change or modification that is made, it actually doesn't go into effect until the terms of 2 or more members elected at the next general election following the modification. So it just, once you do that, it does not automatically go into effect. You have to wait on the next election in which 2 or more members are elected to the board.
Yeah, and I think that's actually kind of standard and in keeping with the way I think county councils and county governments operate. I guess the question that we have overall that is how is this going to, or in other words, are we looking now at standardizing board pay and for school boards? It's probably not a bad idea. But we also know that right now, if you look at board pay and incentives across the board, they're all different, and that's a matter of local law right now. And there actually is a state statute that specifically deals with board pay and board compensation, and that's been modified over and over and over and over because of local law. So anyway, that's where I am on that.
There are quite a few boards currently that have no pay.
That's right.
So, that's
exactly
a question. So I think we have a question.
And what I would say while we're waiting on the question to come in would be, if they were to pass something that was standardizing board compensation across the board, then it would basically overrule or any local laws you have in place at the local level.
Okay, Tony Folk is asking who approves the waivers. I'm going to assume the waivers for the nepotism policy.
State Board of Education, I think.
It is. It's the State Board of Education. Now, Tony, if I have that wrong and it's not the waivers for nepotism but for something else, please let us know. But I'm assuming it's nepotism, and that would be the State Board of Education. And
the interesting thing about that is that, and I'm glad that Tony asked that question, was because if you look at the waiver provision, and this would be a waiver for the nepotism provision. If you're a small district, less than 3,000, there may only be one person in that district who's qualified to be a principal in a school, and just so happens that person's related, close family member with one of the school board members. But some of them, the waiver request itself has information in there that you almost can't quantify it, and that is relating to the number of schools and students that will be affected, performance data by grades and demographics, et cetera, that kind of thing that you have to be able to show in order to get a waiver. And I just don't see how that's possible in that extent, but that's a good question.
okay, I'm sorry, I was reading this question. It's a good question. So moving on to mandated board training. So currently now, as many of you know, the only mandated training is new board orientation. It's an orientation program that must be done within a year after the effective date of the election. So now the new bill would require, they rename it from orientation and just say training program. And it does require new elected, re-elected, or appointed board members to complete a training program within 1 year of taking office. The part of that training, they add some issues that need to be covered, including nepotism. The new conflict of interest provisions that are in this bill must be part of that training. And then it also states that the State Board of Education is to adopt a model training for initial training and for continuing training. So that's new, and it's only mentioned once. And it's very interesting because in this section, it reads as if it's just really for new board orientation, which is renamed as a training program. However, there is that word continuing training. So it is unclear then if you're going to have continuing training. Obviously, that means you're going to have to do this training within your first year of being elected, and that there has to be some more training. I don't know if that means in the next year you have different training, what that really means. It's not really defined, and again, it's only mentioned once, which is really, really interesting. So that's done by December 30th, 1st, 2019. School boards, once that model program is approved by the state board, then the local boards have to adopt a local training program at a regularly scheduled meeting within 3 months after the adoption of the state board model training program. It says that the State Department of Education will reimburse a school district or county board of education conducting new board training at $80 a member and not to exceed annually a total of $10,000. Now that is current law, but that only applies to the new board orientation training. And
That doesn't seem like a lot of money to cover the expanded required training.
no, it may not. It may not. The State Department also keeps a record of board members who complete the training program for at least 5 years.
We did get a question from one of our listeners identifying what a close family member is. The bill itself only refers or makes reference to the current Ethics Act for the definition of immediate family member. So it doesn't change what is an immediate family member. And that's just, for example, that would be your spouse, parent, brother, sister, child, mother-in-law, father-in-law, and the like. So it doesn't change the definition of immediate family member, but it does make reference to the current ethics law regarding that definition. So that was one of the questions that we had. Now somebody here raised a good question too, and it's talking about whether, I guess the overall question being when the Terry program was developed and it was applicable only to retired teachers. And there was a lawsuit that said you can't do that. You can't make something like that apply to only one group. I don't know whether it was a constitutional argument or not. I don't recall whether that was or not. But the Supreme Court did come back and said that had to be opened up to other bodies. And so the question is when you're targeting a specific elected office, does that have the same sort of legal impact in terms of excluding all others except for one particular office? And that's a very good question. Don't have an answer for that. As an attorney, I will say maybe.
Well, what good are you?
It's a good question.
All right, so that is a good question though. All right, so who is paying for this, the training, per the bill? That is a good question, and look, that's going to bring me to my questions, concerns, statements. And concerning this question, yes, the Act does state the reimbursement for board training will be provided, but it does not say anything about who is paying for the cost for the continuing training and exactly what that means. But it does say the reimbursement would be paid by the state. Now, the interesting thing here is it says that the reimbursement will be provided directly to the school district. It does. It says the reimbursement is provided directly to the school district or the county board of education. Currently, the way that it works is the State Department of Education provides the reimbursement to the entity providing the training. So right now, the School Boards Association is one of the entities approved to provide that training, and therefore that funding comes from the department to the School Boards Association. In the new law, it says that reimbursement,
that's only for new board orientation.
Only for new board orientation, says that it goes directly to the school district. So our second question is, obviously, does the bill direct the State Department of Ed to be the only entity in charge of board training, or may other entities, such as our association, provide training as well? So that is the question that we have. And any other thoughts? Well, Helena does say, is this the same question we have? Obviously, is the state, school boards, or local districts? Right now, if you read the bill, it does say local boards, local school districts must offer the training program. So that's how it's worded. Local districts must offer the training, this board training. So don't really know what that exactly means, but that's a good question. This question here from Joy Grayson. Do you know who wrote these bills or which groups were consulted? Good question. We do not. I can just say in general
We know
conversation.
who wasn't consulted.
No. Well, I mean, yeah. Well.
Well, I mean,
Some people may have been consulted, but
I
doesn't mean
think
the
the-
input was taken.
I think the speaker had said that he had worked with several state agencies in developing this bill, which could mean the State Department of Education. It could mean
Office of Revenue Fiscal Affairs could have
right,
been
it
involved.
could be them because they're
Education Oversight Committee.
right. So that's who we feel probably has been mostly involved in the drafting of these bills.
I will say though that it was really done internally. I mean, a lot of it was done internally.
Yes.
If you ask, and that's why it's so important that we, you know, as Scott mentioned, there's been no talk about the provisions with school boards. You all, we really do encourage you to start talking to your lawmakers about this now. It would not surprise us that when you do talk to them, they will have no clue.
Well, they
Absolutely
probably,
no clue.
the vast majority of them. Look, the lawmakers get 100 things a day that they get confronted with regarding legislation, and I think it's incumbent upon us, it's incumbent upon you as school board members to make sure that your lawmakers understand what's in this bill. They haven't read it, they haven't had time to read it. Hope, you know, they maybe have put their name on there as a co-sponsor, and we can find that out for you if you have a question about that. But I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that our legislators understand what is in this bill and how it impacts us as school board members.
Oh.
And get back to the question about, you know, who's authored the bill. I don't know. I really wouldn't. I don't know precisely which entities or agencies had a hand in this. According to the Speaker's office, there were a number of them, but none were really named. So we don't know the answer to that.
Okay, I'm trying to understand Beth's question here. You'll do that? Okay. All right. All right. We're going to get to your question, Beth, if you're listening. Scott's reading that. All right. So let's get to this new section here, which does provide for consequences for non-compliance violation of either the conflicts of interest, the nepotism, the mandated training, and so forth. There are consequences. All right, so the biggest being that the ability to remove school boards adds local school board members, the act does, adds local school board members and the entire school board to those subject to the removal from office by the governor. Currently, this provision would apply to officers of the county or state that the governor may remove. And in this section, they're adding school board members, individual members, and the entire school board. What is confusing is that in one section of the bill, it states that individual seat vacancies that occur for any reason, whether they're removed by the governor, whether people just leave office, those vacancies are filled by the local legislative delegation. However, in another section, it states that the governor fills the vacancy. And still in another section, it states that any kind of a vacancy of an entire board would mean an automatic creation of 5 board seats, and there's different appointments for those seats once the vacancy occurs. In one section, it says the governor may remove a member in a case involving fraud, misappropriation of funds, nepotism, violation of election or procurement laws. In another section, it provides this list as reasons or conditions of which the governor can remove board members: malfeasance, misfeasance, incompetency, absenteeism, conflicts of interest, misconduct, persistent neglect of duty in office, and incapacity. Now, these are new, and what is concerning here is there's, again, with a lot of this, there's no definition for these. Some of these, I mean, some of these things are obvious, but some of them are not so obvious.
Well, what's obvious about incapacity? What's obvious about incompetency? there are, again, this is a good example of where there's no clearly defined meaning for some of these things, and that opens the door for a very subjective type of reaction to a school board member's conduct or a school board member's competency. So that's certainly a concern that we have about that.
Now, in this section where it lists these conditions, it also says, and only in this one, that the governor has to inform the board member of the charges and give the board member an opportunity to be heard. In the other section, I go back to that slide, there is no provision that says the governor must notify the board member and have a hearing. So
certainly inconsistent.
Yes, it is. So if the entire board is removed, again, what I talked about earlier, 5 vacancies are automatically created, regardless of whether there was 9 members on the board that were removed or whether there were 7 members or whatever. It automatically creates 5 vacancies, and then it shows who can make those appointments to fill those, which is the governor, the state superintendent of education, and the local legislative delegation. This is very interesting in the sense that this is a state level officer making appointments to a local body. It's not like this is a state body. It's a local body. So I'm not sure from a legal standpoint. I mean, I don't know. It's
well, I mean, the question to me is that something that raises constitutional implications if you're talking about removing an elected body and all the rights that go along with being that elected official, including, financial and fiscal rights, fiscal authority, and, essentially giving that to an appointed person, an appointed individual. I would just have questions about that. So we do have questions about that portion of it. Debbie, while we're at a pause here, we did get a question regarding the $10,000 for school boards for training. That's statewide. That's
statewide.
Yeah, that is statewide.
That is statewide.
Yeah.
And that's annually. That's all that the State Department can reimburse for training.
And somebody asked a question here. Why are we being singled out? Why not hold elections like the city or county council? And again, these are very good questions that please ask your legislators this. Yes. Why are there instances where school boards are being singled out? And they might come back and say, well, it's not your board, of course, but there are some in the state that, where we've had problems with nepotism. And my response to that is, well, then deal with those instances. Right. Again, the law allows for complaints to be filed regarding ethics violations. Make sure that happens. Follow what the trigger mechanism is for the current law. So those are very good questions. Mm-hmm. I don't have an answer as to why they're being singled out, but I certainly would ask my legislator, why are school boards being singled out? And
let me follow up on that point there, because I will tell you what you're going to get. You're going to get, well, it's not you. It's not my board. It's my school boards are good in my area. It's the other school boards. And if that happens, and then do exactly what Scott says, well, if it's a few or some, then how about address those and not pass a statewide law that applies to every board as if every board are taking these actions. So just so that you don't get trapped into, oh, okay, well, if it's those other boards, then sure, go right ahead. Because that's not very, I don't think it's a good thing. I did want to point that out. All right, so I do want to continue with this though. The other interesting thing is that if because appointments, I will just tell you, looking at state board bodies, when there are appointments by the governor and by the Speaker of the House and all that, a lot of times these state boards have empty seats because those appointments don't get done. And I think this is very interesting that in the statute it says, well, keep in mind that if only 2 members remain on the board, the members cannot take any actions until there's a 3rd member appointed. And there's nothing in the law that says, well, one section it does say within 90 days. Well, that's very concerning because a lot of stuff needs to get done. You can't hold a district kind of captive for 90 days if no one appoints anyone it's not very productive, and it can possibly run into a lot of issues for local districts. So that's very problematic as well.
We did have one question come in here regarding presently a rule of law to define removal of a board for absenteeism. I'm not aware of anything for absenteeism. I think there are provisions, I think, and I underscore that. I think there are provisions regarding neglect of office, and whether absenteeism would be defined as neglect of office or not, I don't know. But that's certainly worth following up on. Thank you for that question.
Okay, I think we just went over the concerns, the definition, all that. I think we've already done that. So, so for mandated training.
Yeah, hold on to your seats for this one.
Yeah, this is unreal. All right, so that mandated training, which again we haven't defined as what is continuing, but certainly, you know, if you don't complete this training within 1 year of being elected, annually, the state board is to notify the State Ethics Commission of any local school board member who has not completed the mandated training and is in violation of the State Ethics Act and must be assessed a civil penalty. And it's could be included as that as a fine of $100 if the training is not completed. And then after notice is given to the commission and still not completed, then there is a fine of $10 per day for the first 10 days. And after that, I think it's $100 a day for each additional day, but not to exceed $5,000. The question I have here is that, so by July 1, you haven't done it, you then have to pay a fine of $100. And if you don't get that training in within, you know, so many days, 10 days, at least certainly you're going to be assessed a lot of money. So how do you get this training in that quick of a turnaround? I don't know if maybe there's going to be something online or how that's going to work. And keep in mind that another fine or another violation is that you can be removed by the governor for violating this provision once the notice has, but it has to, you have to have notice of that and again, an opportunity for a hearing on that issue. So after the maximum fine and you still have not completed the training, and you've been, you know, levied those fines, you have not, and you also have not sent in your statement, a report, you know, that says you adhere to the nepotism policy, what I mentioned earlier, and you haven't done all those things that you're supposed to do, you can again be fined not more than $500 or imprisoned not more than 30 days for the first offense conviction. You fine not less than $2,500, no more than $5,000, or imprisoned not less than a mandatory minimum of 30 days for a second offense conviction, and fined not more than $5,000 or imprisoned for not more than 1 year, or both, for a third or subsequent offense conviction. All right. So what do y'all think about that? Let us know. In addition to all of what was just mentioned, or the State Ethics Commission may also impose an oral or written warning of reprimand for those members as well.
We had one person ask about talking points, and I don't want to interrupt the train of thought here, but we are going to be sending out talking points relating to some of this soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Please, and thank you for saying that and asking that question, because this bill was dropped, what, a week? It just seems like a month ago, but it was only like 2 weeks ago. And I promise you, it has been nonstop. They, you know, it was dropped on a Thursday. They scheduled a first hearing on Tuesday, and it has been nonstop. So yes, we are working on that. And again, every time we read this, you know, we see something new, and so we will, yes, to answer your question, we will be putting out a handout. That's why I made these slides the way they are, with a little bit more information, so that hopefully you can use this information as well. Okay, question, are there provisions like this for other elected officials? No, not for training. There is not. Not imprisonment. There are fines that can be levied by the Ethics Commission for violation of the ethics law. And there are fines, as you know, if you don't fill in, complete your reports, your statement of economic interest that are within the state ethics law.
Yeah, I have to say I'm not aware that there are mandatory training requirements for city and county officials or even for the members of the legislature.
No.
And this is something that's entirely new. The extension of the new board orientation to mandatory training for which you can be fined or face jail time for failing to get that training is something, as far as I'm aware, is wholly focusing on school boards.
And certainly training is important. We always say that you all in your local communities are probably the largest employer, have probably the largest operating budget. So certainly training is very important. And it's definitely something that should be ongoing, whether it's to be mandated, and whether certainly not having these kinds of fines and imprisonment is very, very concerning for us, because we just kind of want to remind people that while it is an honor to be on a school board, it is primarily a volunteer service. I mean, it's not something that, this is a career for anybody serving on a school board, and that's your, primary mode of compensation. So we need to keep that in mind, and we do have districts that have some difficulty lately in getting candidates to run for the school board. And it's just, things like this put have a real chilling effect on folks who may be interested in running for the school board or serving on a school board. So we're very, very concerned about that. All right, so another area in which there are some repercussions and consequences is they've added a provision about your school or district accreditation. So now, when schools have to be accredited, districts don't have to be accredited necessarily, but a lot of districts do apply for that district-wide accreditation. And in that process, there's a new provision that allows the State Board of Education to recommend suspending board members of schools or districts at risk of accreditation or losing accreditation for governance reasons. In other words, if it is shown that you are at risk of losing your accreditation because some behavior of a school board, then the state board can conduct a hearing and can recommend to the governor that the board members that either certain board members, if it shows, I think what they're saying here, if there's only certain board members that have, are the problem, then you could be able to remove those board members, but keep the rest of them, or it could be an entire board, could suspend them. And again, and in this case, that if board members if the entire board or board members are suspended, the governor gets to make those appointments of temporary placement members in that case. All right. In this provision, unlike other provisions, the majority of the board can petition the state board for continuance. In other words, show we're not, and ask the board for that. That's different than in the other provisions that we just went over. There is no appeal. There is no other body that the board or board members can appeal to, which we are going to fight to get added in, because that is just not right, in our opinion. So again, with that, state board deliberations. Oh, the other issue in here is that it states that the state board, when they're deliberating whether or not to make the recommendation of suspension, that can be done in private, can be behind closed doors. We are going to request that they ought to be made public if it is requested by the board. Now, the board's testimony or any testimony or the vote, the actual vote of whether to make that suspension recommendation must be done in public. So everything else has to be done in public. It's just when the state board deliberates whether or not to make the recommendation, that is allowed to be held behind closed door. And I would tell you the State Press Association has already testified its opposition to that and has asked that to be made public. So I just wanted to make that note as well.
Kevin, you recall going back to the required training within 1 year of taking office. That's correct, right?
Yeah. Wait a minute, and the only one deadline related to fines.
We'll have to,
No.
we'll have to clarify that, but I know that the training requirement is within 1 year of taking off.
Well, that's one, but there's another provision about continuing training. And again, that's not defined. It says initial and continuing training, as if that's not all you have to do. There must be some other, this training program must include something other than training that you have to do within 1 year of taking office. And no, so then if that's the case, the question about does the fine only apply to just that one deadline, I would say no. I would say that fine probably applies to the initial training and the continuing training, whatever that is.
And we had another question related to training that under the current law for new board orientation, if somebody has not received that training, should they be removed? Right now, there's no provision in the law for removal for lack of.
But that's a good question.
For lack of meeting the training requirements. So that's not covered currently under what the law says.
No. Okay.
Somebody asked while we're moving forward, somebody also asked about, seems like there are a lot of constitutional problems with this bill. Yeah, and that's something that, we as an association will raise when we're talking to lawmakers about this bill. Quite honestly, just because something is unconstitutional doesn't mean that it's not going to get passed into law. It's going to be unconstitutional at the time that it's challenged, it's enacted and it's challenged. But there are provisions in here that we feel like clearly cross previously decided constitutional mandates. And so, yeah, these are issues that we will certainly raise with lawmakers.
Okay, these next few or several slides I want to bring up because they really are very big. They're big. In addition to the one sections on the board training and ethics. So mandated consolidation, there is a provision in this bill that does direct the consolidation of districts with less than 1,000 students. There's a timeline, there's a provision or requirement to provide a plan for the merges, and that could include shared services with another district. There are some factors that are taken into consideration with the consolidation, but it does mandate the consolidation of those districts as well. So we, of course, what we say is that consolidation obviously works best when there is local buy-in. We can show examples. For example, Marion County, where it has worked very, very well, where that's something that the board and the community wanted. So we're going to be continuing to reiterate our position on this issue. Another provision in this bill is it basically takes the Education Accountability Act's provision when it comes to takeovers, technical assistance for lower performing schools, and it ramps it up, folks. It ramps it up. It creates, for schools, it creates a chronically underperforming designation, and that occurs when a school has an unsatisfactory rating for 3 out of 4 years. The State Board of Education, upon recommendation of the state superintendent, must decide one of the following options. The key here is every one of these options are very big. They basically just does away with the school. It allows the school to be closed, to be restarted as a charter school. It closes the school and transfers the students to a higher performing school in the district if there is one, or it allows a education management organization, an EMO, to just take over the management of that school. So in essence, it's removed from the district, there is no option under the EAA formally. There was an option for the state superintendent to have in these cases where we could continue with technical assistance. We could continue doing a renewal plan. We could, so there was more options. These are very strong options, and it says must, and it's only one. So very, very concerning. we need to, we really do need to talk to lawmakers about this. This is, because as we know, there's no evidence that shows that these provisions will mean a success for the students in those schools. There's just no research on that. The other question is there, it says 3 or 4 years. Well, is that consecutive years? Is that 3 years at any point in time? And so that's the questions. We also want to know, do these provisions apply to charter schools? And if not, it needs to be stipulated in the legislation. We need a fourth option, again, that would allow the state board to continue technical assistance. And that's to address any changes that occur. As you know, that accountability system, we have often changed the formula that gives the rating for schools in the mid process. In fact, right now, because of the new release of the new report cards, they are tweaking it now. They're going to make changes. And so is it fair then to have a rating that changes every year, every other year on these schools? Under No Child Left Behind and in the previous accountability system, as you know, they would ramp it up every year. That's the cut score, if you will, would change every year. So if you were a low performing school, it was very difficult for you to climb out if they were going to make the requirements stronger every year or even tougher every year. So we need to have that fourth option to give, because there needs to be that provision instead of making such a drastic permanent change to a school that is, as we know, community based. We also need a provision that requires the State Department of Education to document all the technical assistance and support that has been provided to those lower performing schools. Right now, the technical assistance is provided to the bottom 5 and 10% of performing schools. So what we do know is that not every school that is rated unsatisfactory is getting technical assistance. It may be getting some form, but it is not. And that's because of the way the formula has been formulated in order to provide these ratings. So there's a different standard here, and we're very, very concerned about that. And again, there is no processing here for the local board to appeal to any other body. For the school districts, the state of emergency provision. This is now defined as if a district has a majority of students who attend schools in the district that are rated unsatisfactory or below average. Districts in state of emergency for 4 consecutive years results in the district and the school board being dissolved and giving the State Board of Education full authority to do any combination of the following. And again, all of these options are high stakes. They basically remove the district. It eliminates the district and the board. Again, to have the element of below average rated is unfair. It's not in the school, at the school level, and that's done so for a reason. Again, with the changes to the Accountability Act, and also to keep in mind that, yes, while we have other provisions other than testing in our accountability system, I would say 90% are based on test scores, especially for your elementary and your middle schools. It is primarily still on test scores. So that's very problematic. Again, I already went through that. So I'm going to stop here. Any questions?
One question that came in regarded if the governor puts in replacement board members, is there a requirement that they come from that local community?
No.
Okay.
No, there's not.
Asked and answered.
And that's a good question, because no, you're right. I don't recall reading anything it says anything local community, and that's a key point. I'm gonna write that down, Christine.
That's a good question. Another question was, who basically is in charge of requiring that school boards are knowledgeable of these training requirements and candidates for school board? And I'm just going to guess that because the law or the bill says that local boards must provide this training, what that makes me think is the legislature saying it's going to be up to the local school district to make sure that candidates know about it and that they get it, and that's way I would read that.
I agree. I would agree.
So it's not going to be the election commission that's making it happen. It's going to have to be the local school boards, the way I read that.
Y'all, thank you so much for commenting and sending in these questions. These are great. I'm going to add a lot of these questions to our talking points that we use to talk with lawmakers. So I greatly appreciate these. You have another one? Well, I agree with this, James. I agree with you on that. Why is it assumed that a charter school is better? Certainly, if you look at the data, and there are certainly some charter schools that do very well, and there are certain charter schools that are not doing well. I think it mirrors pretty much what, the traditional schools statewide, if you look statewide. In some cases, that they actually do not, as a whole, perform better than the traditional public schools. So certainly agree with you on that.
I think that we had an earlier question talking about the board compensation. And I guess currently the way things are is there is a state statute that says boards may not receive pay, but they can set reimbursement and per diem. That, however, has been modified over decades through local legislation and what's being put in. And so if you look, and many boards do not get pay, but many of them get a per diem or something. And again, that's mostly set up in local law. And what's being put in this bill would basically put it back on to the local boards to basically set their own pay. And that would be something that, as long as that's something, the only stipulation would be that it couldn't change until
the effective date of when,
next general election following any modifications of the pay.
I think we were pointing that out too, just with the differences, is that we just want to make sure that lawmakers know that. We're not saying that having a uniform standard for board pay is necessarily a bad idea. But what we want them to understand is that it may change local law. So that's the only point in bringing that up.
And if that puts it in parity with what counties are doing, then that's probably the way it should be.
Yeah. We'll point that out. All right, so these next, I just put this as other because we're not going to have time to go through all these because there's whole sections and written about these, but I do want to point out some other key points, if you will, of the bill that are very interesting and something that you need to know about. And again, we're going to do a summary and get that out to you so that you can read further on these issues. But just to kind of point out some other major components, it does create a student's bill of rights. It is worded such that students should be able to expect. It's not a right. So that is a good thing. Students should expect to be in safe schools. It doesn't say they have a right to be because that's, sets up some questions about that. But it is very interesting. So it does set that up. And there's another provision that is probably the most talked about provision. Oh, yes. Let me go back to that. Thank you, Scott, for pointing out that in that student bill of rights, the one thing that is very concerning is this provision that says students should expect to have the option to attend schools outside of their zoned area that meet their individual needs and aspirations. So, okay, so do not know if then that is something that must be provided, if that's going to make that change. So we do have that question about that as well. Anything else?
Private or public either.
No, that's true. It does not. And somewhere in there, it also says the money follows the child, which what we know means that the state, local, federal funds all follow the child to either another public school or to a private school. Okay, another provision, and this is the one that's getting probably the most talk about, is it sets up yet another state level committee headed by, yes, an education czar. It's a committee of 20.
Literally called that in the proposed statute.
In the statute, an education czar. Keep in mind that we already have a state board of education. We have an education oversight committee. We have an EEDA coordinating council. We have a workforce development committee. We have first steps. I mean, we could just go on and on and on. But this particular committee apparently is going to be within the lieutenant governor's office. It will look at from zero to
this from
workforce.
the same entity that wants local school districts to consolidate in order to be more efficient and save money.
So yes, we're going to create yet another committee who looks at everything from birth to workforce. So just want to let you know about that. That's probably the most talked about. But I would say that, yes, that's not a good thing. But at the same time, there's a whole lot worse things like the takeovers and the, I would say, are more serious than this. Also, to let you know, it sets a higher starting teacher salary, but it does eliminate the standard or statewide minimum teacher salary schedule. It creates salary bands, if you will, 3-year increments. So, and it does, when it does eliminate that starting teacher salary, excuse me, the state minimum teacher salary schedule, it does say that increases would be based on either some sort of a performance or merit pay raises, which would be determined at the local district level. So we have a position statement that you all and our members have supported, that we do believe in differentiated pay. So we'll have to look more closely at that. And while it does eliminate standardized tests for social studies and history in the high school, it does add screening mandates or screening assessments for K-3 at least 3 times a year. And that is to be diagnostic, to look at numeracy and literacy, to include dyslexia, that requirement that was passed last year, that we have to have screening for students to determine whether they have dyslexia. There is under Read to Succeed, as you know, the mandatory retention of third graders not reading on grade level. There is some, options there for parent, does not want that, or if there's some teacher discretion put in there, that's all eliminated, and it makes it mandatory retention of any third grader not reading on grade level. And I will give a shout out, if that's okay, to Philip Bowers, a board member in Pickens County. He did attend the very first public hearing on this bill and did testify, very personal testimony on this particular provision. So we do appreciate that. And any board member who would like to testify in this section can do so this Wednesday at 9 a.m. in the Senate Education Subcommittee. And I've got some information we'll be sending out to you all in our legislative update. Finally, this is very concerning, and it's under the teacher salary section where it talks about it deletes the required EFA annual increase. The inflationary adjustment that must be, it deletes that. So we're very concerned by that. We argue that you do not delete this EFA provision, not until you have a state, that teacher salary program in law. I mean, if you're going to change it or eliminate it, then what exactly is that going to be? We do not want to see that inflationary factor be removed from the EFA until that is determined, and until we have funding restructuring set.
Kind of a cart before the horse.
That's right.
Kind of this issue, I think.
So that is a key provision.
I think we got through most of the questions. I apologize if you specifically sent in a question that we did not address for whatever reason. If please follow up with emails. Our emails are online. And if you please follow up. And also remind you all that the PowerPoint is online. Several people have asked about that. We will be following up with discussion points. And we did have one question from somebody about what's the rationale behind all of this energy. Again, I don't think anybody would argue that there are certain elements to our educational system that need to have a good close look. Funding reform is something that we have pushed forward in the association for years, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And we're being told by lawmakers that's round two. The other part that is of crisis mode, quite honestly, is teacher recruitment and retention. I don't think anybody would disagree that that it needs to be addressed, and there are several things in this bill that do address that do go toward that. So I think that there's probably a number of reasons for what has precipitated this to sort of rise to the top this year. And again, it's to the extent that it's an opportunity to talk about some of these issues relating to education reform and funding reform, then it's a good discussion to have. I just want to make sure that you all as our membership know what's in the bill. Don't allow lawmakers to just talk about the generalities of education reform without knowing what exactly is in the bill, because there are some significant items in there that they need to know about, you need to know about, and please share that with them. Again, if we didn't get a chance to answer your questions, please follow up with us, and we'll do the best we can to follow up with you in terms of getting responses back to you. Debbie, do you have something you want to add?
No, I know. I do want to say that I think one of the things that we heard maybe a year ago or 2 years ago is that, we want to do something with funding. And we know we need to do funding, but we don't want to do that unless we have more accountability. So if you look at this bill, there may be some positive things in it, but as you all look at this bill, if you could let us know what you think is new or innovative, and then also keep in mind that because they've opened up, if you will, this can, that we ought to use this opportunity to also ask for the things that we would like to see. So we don't necessarily have to, we as an association, absolutely, and we're doing that. We are doing that. But we don't, now that yes, we obviously need to respond to what's in the bill, but we also need to be also saying, you know what, this is what we would like to see. We would like to see these kinds of reforms. We would like to see, less testing. We would like to see those kinds of things. So, what is this question? I'm sorry.
Sorry, question. Let them know that we're going to let you know when we know when these meetings are being scheduled across the state.
Well, I just mentioned that if you can, this Wednesday, there's a first opportunity. The Senate K-12 subcommittee is going to be taking up the board ethics training, all the provisions sections that we talked about in this webinar. They're going to be taking these up on Wednesday at 9 a.m. in the Gressett building. And if you want, obviously they're taking public input. We will be there, but we would certainly invite you all to come and testify your questions, concerns, or support for these provisions to attend that meeting. And of course, we will let you know as more opportunities happen. We'll let you know about those.
Again, thank you for spending your lunch with us to learn about these very important bills that are working their way through the legislature. Thank you for all that you do, and we look forward to talking to you, I guess, in a few weeks at some of you at convention. Certainly we'll be talking to you then about that too. So again, thank you for your time, and please let us know, email us, call us if you have further input or further questions that need to be addressed.
Thank you, everybody.